Before we dive into this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I first met the incredible Mrs. Evelyn when I joined high school. She was in her early 50s back then, and she commanded respect with her presence. Her sharp wit and intellectual depth made her stand out among the other teachers. Time passed, and after graduation I lost touch with most of my teachers. Life happened, and I pursued my career a decade later. I found myself back in my hometown where memories of the past often resurfaced. One rainy evening while walking down the streets of my old neighborhood, I saw her. There she was, sitting by the window of a quiet cafe, sipping tea, her glasses perched on her nose, engrossed in a book. It took me a moment to realize it was Mrs. Evan. She had aged, of course, but there was something timeless about her. Her silver hair was styled in a neat bun, and her soft wrinkles only added grace to her face. Without a second thought, I walked into the cafe, and before I knew it, I was standing at her table. "Mrs. Evelyn?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her deep blue eyes sparkling with excitement. Her eyes sparkled with recognition. "Well, look who it is," she said, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "I haven't seen you in years. How have you been?" We chatted for hours, reminiscing and catching up on life. There was something comforting about her presence. It was like returning to a place you once knew, but seeing it in a new light. As the evening wore on, the rain stopped and we parted ways. But not before she gave me her number. Over the next few weeks, we began meeting more often. Dinners, long walks, and discussions that lasted late into the night. I was hooked. Our time together was always something I looked forward to. It wasn't long before I started seeing her in a different light. The years had changed her physically, yes, but her mind was as sharp as ever. Her laugh was infectious and her stories captivating. I realized that the admiration I had for her as a student had grown into something deeper, something I couldn't quite put into words yet. One evening we found ourselves at her home, and it was cozy. It's filled to the brim with books and memories of a life well lived. We sat in the living room and we sipped wine. Conversation flowed effortlessly as the night wore on. The atmosphere shifted, becoming more intimate. There was a long pause between us, and I found myself unable to look away from her. She set her glass down and turned to me. Her gaze was soft but intense. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," she began. Her voice was steady yet filled with an emotion I couldn't place. I stayed. My heart was racing with excitement. "I've always valued our connection," she continued, "even back when you were my student. But these past few weeks, I've felt something more." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel my pulse quicken, and the room suddenly felt much smaller. She took a deep breath and leaned in slightly, her hand resting lightly on mine. "I know this might sound strange given our history, but I can't ignore it." I couldn't ignore it any longer. Her confession was like a spark, igniting feelings I had been trying to suppress. I realized then that I had fallen for her deeply, irrevocably. The age gap didn't matter, our past as teachers and students didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection we had now. I moved closer, closing the space between us. Her hand trembled slightly as I took it in mine, but her eyes never wavered. There was a vulnerability there, a shared understanding. We were aware of the risks we were taking, but there was also desire, a deep unspoken longing that had been building between us. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "I feel the same," I whispered, barely able to believe the words as they left my mouth. For a moment, she looked surprised, but then her face softened and a slow smile spread across her lips. The next thing I knew, we were kissing. It was slow at first, tentative as if we were both testing the waters, but soon the kiss deepened. Her lips were soft and her breath tasted of wine. I pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Felt right, like this was something that had been meant to happen for a long time. The kiss lasted forever, but when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and desire. "I didn't think I could ever feel this way again," she said quietly, almost to herself. Neither did I. But as we sat there, our hands intertwined, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We weren't just two people caught up in a moment of passion. This was something more, something real. And it scared me just as I could tell it scared her, but there was no turning back now. From that night on, our relationship changed. We became inseparable, spending almost every evening together. We would have long, passionate conversations about life, love, and everything in between. Sometimes we would we were happy to simply enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. When the silence grew too thick, our bodies would find each other. Drawn together by a force that neither of us could explain, we were inseparable. It wasn't just physical, though that was undeniably a part of it. It was emotional. She filled a void in my life that I hadn't even realized was there, and I did the same for her. We were two people from different worlds and different times, yet somehow we fit together perfectly. But as with all things, reality eventually intruded. But then reality intruded. We had to be careful about who knew about us, our age difference, and our past as teachers and students. It would be too much for some to understand. While part of me wanted to shout from the rooftops about how I felt, I knew we had to keep this to ourselves, at least for now. As time went on, we grew more comfortable in our secret. The moments we shared became more meaningful, each kisses deeper and each touch more tender. We knew the risks, but we were willing to take them because what we had was worth it, and so our story continued at a leisurely pace, like the turning of pages in a book. There was no need to rush, no need to reach the climax too soon. We relished every moment, every stolen glance, every whispered word. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was all that mattered. One evening, as we lay together in the soft glow of her bedroom, our bodies entwined, Mrs. Evelyn suddenly sat up, her eyes brimming with she looked at me with a new intensity. She took my hand and squeezed it tightly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We can't keep this a secret forever," she said. Her tone was filled with both urgency and fear. "I don't want to hide anymore. I want all of you out in the open." Her vulnerability struck me. For the first time, I realized just how much this relationship meant to her. It also made me realize how much it had come to mean to me. But the weight the world felt heavier than ever, but I knew what she was asking. What it would cost us both to step into the light. Staring into her eyes, I realized there was no turning back without another word. I kissed her fiercely as if the world outside our little sanctuary no longer existed. It was a kiss full of promise, full of everything unspoken between us at that moment. I knew we were bound by something deeper than love, something that transcended time, age, and the past. Together, we would face whatever came our way. Consequences be damned. Our love was worth the risk. As the night deepened and we lay there in the quiet aftermath, her head resting on my chest, the rhythm of our breathing slowly sinking in, the world outside felt distant as if it couldn't touch us in the safety of this moment. But beneath the calm, I could feel the tension building up. The storm that would come once we stepped outside was still there, but I tightened my arms around her, silently vowing to protect what we had no matter the cost. Mrs. Evelyn glanced up at me, her eyes searching mine, and in that brief exchange I knew we both understood the gravity of what lay ahead. But for now, in this fragile, stolen moment, none of it mattered. All that existed was us.